Now, in the last few episodes, I've been starting each show with some semi-witty banter. Something like, in this episode, Henrik drops the mighty DR.
Yeah, but it just takes 10
Jason
seconds to
learns
roll.
the difference between righty-tighty and lefty-loosey.
Yeah.
And the awesome players tackle trails so tough, only GS motorcycles and Volvo sedans could possibly make the grade. But I think this time we'll do something different. I think this episode is going to be more about what it would be like on a typical dual sport ride with the awesome players, where you leave at 6 o'clock or so in the morning and you get home in the middle of the afternoon. So if you've ever thought about owning a dual sport, or what dual sporting is, or what you could do by getting off the pavement and onto the dirt, at least in our neck of the woods, stay tuned. And I'll warn you right now, this is a long one. It's about an hour and 10, 11 minutes long, but it'll give you a real good idea of what we do on our Sunday morning rides. And now for the logo. Well, instead of starting with a shot of a coffee shop, I thought this time we would do things a little differently and start with a rolling shot. So here you see Henrik in front of me on the mighty DR, and leading us is Jason on his F800 GS, and I'm bringing up the rear on my 800 GS. Now, the dynamics of a ride are very different depending on who's going along. And today would be the first time when it would be just the three of us. Joe and Chris didn't make it today. And as we're riding along, I realize that both Jason and Henrik are two guys that I met on the net. This was back when I was still dating. No, I mean seriously, they were both just two guys who were looking for folks to ride with. Now, we didn't really have a plan for the day, but thought we might as well start by doing our old favorite, Scotch Road. It's a nice warm-up route. First, you cross the bridge and you do a little sightseeing. And I could tell by the way everybody was doing a little goofing around that everybody was in a good mood. After the bridge, you come to a short set of paved twisties, which is nice. And then you hit some curvy gravel. And finally, it turns into a rougher section of dirt road. And after a little while, this takes you to a little sand pit, which is always fun. The nice thing about sand is that it's a great practice for riding on loose terrain. The speeds are low, especially the way we do it, and if it all goes wrong, it is relatively soft on man and machine. We did a few laps, but I think today we wanted to cover a little distance, so we got ready to head out. That's when Henrik all of a sudden thought that the DR was making mighty strange noises.
Has it never made that before?
It sounds louder.
We all listened, but it sounded like a single-cylinder Suzuki maintained by a Hungarian mechanic to the rest of us. While Henrik was worrying about his bike exploding, Jason decided to do a quick chain adjustment on the F800.
That's inside, right?
Yeah.
Once he figured out which way was loose and which way was tight, it didn't take that long.
The chain just went, That's better. You can almost touch that chain guard. Yeah.
So once we convinced Henrik his bike wasn't going to explode, and once Jason was convinced his chain wasn't going to be so tight that it would pull the front sprocket off, we mounted up and headed back down the road. Now, sometimes you have to cross a stream or a river to get somewhere, and sometimes you do it just for fun. On this route, there is a spot where you actually cross a bridge to get to the water crossing, but we usually can't resist doing it. The first time you do this crossing, the approach can be a little daunting. You have to go down this relatively steep little rocky ledge here. But the bottom of this crossing is solid, The only thing you have to watch out for are these kind of randomly spaced, fair head-sized rocks down there, which can kind of stop you in your tracks or knock you over. Once he gets rolling, Jason splashes across without too much difficulty. So I follow him. And then I decided I would try to run back and get some good footage of Henrik crossing. Now Henrik makes one of the common mistakes here, which is you kind of stop at the entrance to the water crossing. What you really want to do here is roll into the water already standing on the pegs, already kind of at a uniform speed.
Stand up, baby!
But once he gets rolling, he bumps across, but then he hits one of those little submerged rocks and dumps it.
Hey, you had it made, man. You had it made in the shade.
Now, I'm not quite sure if Henrik just keeps dropping his bike in water because it makes for good video and he's just trying to be a nice guy, or if it's some sort of Central European bike maintenance technique that I'm not familiar with. If you flash back to a couple of weeks ago, you can see here that Henrik gave his bike a real dunking, so by comparison this was pretty minor.
Watch out, car coming.
Now usually in the mornings we don't encounter too many people, so I'd left my bike parked in the middle of the road, so I ran back to move it out of the way. And as these folks go by, we always try to wave so that a lot of people kind of don't seem too impressed when they see a bunch of dirt bikes on the side of the road, so we always try to be polite.
Give her! Just redline it. Nice.
And finally, with a handful of throttle, the mighty DR gets out of the water. Now, I've known Henrik now going on 10 plus years, and he is a very thoughtful soul, and sometimes I think he actually does drop his bike just so we can have a little break and maybe get a few fun shots on video. Now, the road quality here is pretty good. You can go fast here, and you can make it more interesting. But some days it's nice just to cruise and not push it. Get a little thinking done. Let the week's worth of stress and problems just kind of fade away and just focus on riding. Now you could be riding down this road on pretty much any motorcycle, but one of the things that's great about a dual sport is when you see that little trail that shoots off into the woods, you don't hesitate. Even if it's only for 100 meters, it's nice not to be hemmed in by your machine. The unwritten rule in our group is to let everybody ride at their own pace. You know, there are days where I like to just sit in the back and cruise without seeing anybody in front of me. And there's other days where you feel like wicking up the pace a bit to make it a little more exciting. But we found that letting people ride their own ride is key, key to people not crashing. So what we do is when we get to the next major intersection, we'll just sit there for a couple of minutes and wait for whoever is tail end Charlie to catch up. Now this here looks like someone's driveway, and for the longest time we actually thought it was, but this is the road. So after you get through this relatively smooth section, the road does get more interesting. The road gets a little rockier, and there are some decent hill climbs. And of course, if there are uphills, there are usually downhills. You know, I would say this is perfect big GS terrain. It's open enough so you get to use some displacement generated power, but it's rough enough and it's not so wide open that you have to really go fast to have fun. Going slower means crashing slower, and my shoulder tells me that is a good thing. Now Jason, who knows this area quite well, has told me that we should be hanging a right when this road ends. As the road went on, we did increase the pace slightly. I did hit this one corner here where I did feel the front end start to push a little bit, so I slowed down. Might have been a good idea to have been standing on the pegs, but I can be lazy.
That's a nice road.
Now Jason seemed to have a plan, so once we hit the blacktop, we followed him. Now the area we're riding here is right along the Quebec-Ontario provincial border, and these two-lane paved roads are very typical of this area. They're relatively twisty, but very bumpy, so once again, perfect GS road. After riding along on what passes for a paved road in this province, we actually came to one of the few smooth roads in this area, and once again fell in behind Jason, who seemed to have a plan and seemed to know where he was going. Now, a few people have asked about the flashing brake light on Jason's bike and my bike. That tail light doesn't actually flash. It's an LED tail light on these F800 GS models, and apparently it does flash at a really high frequency that we can't see. But because of the electronic shutter in the video camera, it sees it as flashing, but he is not driving around all the time with his tail light flashing like that. And after a very short jaunt down this beautiful paved road, we came to what looked like an abandoned ski hill.
Up there?
Here we see Jason's new helmet. Apparently it's not available in black.
So we are going.
But it's available with tits in blue, yellow, and red.
Nice. And oddly enough, you have a new shifter. Hey, yours is even straight.
For now.
A little looking around revealed that there was a trail to the right, which seemed pretty clearly marked as no trespassing. And then to the left, there seemed to be an ATV trail that looked worth exploring. Now, if you own a modern GS, of course you'll be well familiar with this protocol. You jump on your bike, and you turn on the ignition, and then the first thing you do is make sure you turn off the ABS. And you don't have to forget more than once or twice to turn it off, and then you will never forget again. Trust me on this.
You found it, you follow it.
Now, I had no idea where this would lead. Jason told us he had come here alone, but had turned back because it was quite wet and muddy, and he came upon a few really sloppy looking sections, and he was afraid of getting stuck in there all by himself. Well, this time we were coming back in force. There was 3 of us. We actually had brought water and tools and fellow riders to blame it on if it all went terribly wrong. And right away we came to the first rocky climb, and I made a bad decision. Now, depending on the nature of the terrain, sometimes you can stay sitting and climb a really steep hill, and all that weight on the rear tire will give you really good traction. But on this loose rocky stuff, here I am sitting, and as soon as I got deflected and then the tire spun, because I wasn't Standing up, I couldn't recover from it. Now, once again, this hill doesn't look steep, but as I've got the front brakes on, the bike is wanting to slide backwards. So now, of course, you have the problem of how do I get going? So, you try to feather the clutch, not feed in too much power, and of course, ideally here, what you're trying to do is get up enough speed so you can stand up on the pegs, and just when I'm about to do that, the front end washes out, and down she goes. Turn off the kill switch, catch your breath, and then as I look down the hill, I see that Henrik isn't having much more success on the mighty DR. So my bike looks pretty heavy. So at this point, I decide it's probably better off just to head down the hill and give Henrik a hand.
Okay, get on, Bill. No, I'll push you up. I'll push you up, get on. If you stay to the left, it's good. You'll be alright, you're on good traction here for a start. You're okay. Get on.
So while I steady the bike, Henrik swings a leg over. And now, even though the DR is relatively low, you can see here that Henrik is still on his tippy toes, which makes it a little tougher.
Go! Yeah, you're good. As soon as you can, stand up. Okay, the rock's gone. You're golden!
So with me pushing, Henrik tries to get rolling, and then Jason joins the party.
You're good.
And with the two of us steadying the DR and giving him a shove, he eventually reaches escape velocity and gets moving.
Go, go, go! I tried to be lazy. I was sitting down. I was going fine. I had lots of nice rear wheel traction. And then one wheel hit a rock, and because I'm not standing up, I couldn't save it. All right, let's do it. 1, 2, 3. Ah!
Then Jason and I muscled up the old 800. Now, one of the things I'll do in a situation like this is I'll actually just leave the bike in gear. And that way, when you are rolling the bike around on an incline like this, anytime you let go of the clutch, the rear wheel at least stops the bike from rolling back down the hill.
Hey! Oh, fuck! I scratched it!
And I guess I'll never be able to say that this bike has never been dropped now.
On my crash bar.
Now, Henrik had ambled on down to give us a hand, and with all hands on deck, we got this little dual sport turned around and pointing the right direction. Of course, you always get on from the high side. And then, with a little steadying and a little shove from my compatriots, up the hill I went.
Good. Hey, what happened?
Well, let's try that again, and up the hill I went. Now, of course, there is never a bad time for a practical joke. So, despite it being August and quite warm, I decided it would be a good idea to put Jason's grip heaters on high as a thank you for helping me get up that hill. And after a few minutes, we all mounted up and off we went. Now, I was getting pretty excited here. It looked like Jason had found us a great new riding area, just a hop and a skip from our regular haunts. You know, finding a place with some open trails that are interesting and last more than a few kilometers is quite rare. So this was turning out to be quite a find. We rounded a bend, and there was another decent hill climb up ahead. I hung back to watch Jason and allow myself to hit the hill with a little bit of speed. Once I saw Jason disappear around the corner, off I went. Into second gear, stand up on the pegs, elbows up, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And of course that Scott steering damper doesn't hurt. Now, I think a lot of people, myself included, when they see a hill like that, they have this temptation to want to kind of crawl up it in first gear. And I can remember this from years ago when Joe and I were trying to climb a steep hill in our KLRs, and we were in first gear and we were spinning our tires and falling. And as we were struggling, a guy in a bone stock KLR just zips by us in second gear without even breaking a sweat. So I guess I'm a slow learner, but when you can, that extra speed stabilizes everything, gives you that momentum to get over obstacles, and also makes it less likely for you to be diverted off course by a rock or something than if you're going really slowly. So we continued. And, a lot of the times you can get off to a great start on a trail like this, and after a few minutes it just dumps you back onto a main road. But this trail just seemed to keep going. And we went for quite some time until we got to the first junction, and at this junction Jason made the command decision up front to turn right. So we continued following Jason, and I certainly felt now that I was starting to get into the groove. So when we got to the next long rocky climb, I stood up on the pegs and tried to look a little farther ahead, and made it up no problem. I mean, you can on some of these things kind of psych yourself out. I mean, if you think you're going to crash and you're not going to make it up that hill, odds are you aren't. And then of course, as soon as I can, I get my butt down on the seat to take a little breather. Then I saw the first warning signs that the trail is going to end. Grass. I hate grass. When you see grass growing all over the trail, it usually means that the trail becomes impassable up ahead or a dead end is coming up. We got to another Y junction, and as soon as we headed in here, the alarm bells really started ringing now. This had all the makings of a trail that's going to peter out. First of all, we're going downhill, and usually when you're going downhill like this, at the bottom of that hill is water, and when you hit that water, it usually is a swamp, and a swamp means getting stuck and trying to pull 500-pound bikes out while getting eaten by bugs. But for the moment, the trail continued, and we continued to follow Jason, and I could see up ahead here he was having a little more trouble. I decided to take a slightly different route and stay more to the left.
I think we're gonna have a problem.
And now once we got to this big rock, we could see that the trail kind of went over this hill and down, and it was at this point that we decided it was a good idea to flick out the side stands and proceed on foot. Now, we are capable of learning, and we have learned that a little foot reconnaissance is much better than ramming a few 500-pound bikes into a bog.
This is doable. All right, we're sending our best man ahead.
Jason continued a little farther in, but I could already see that this was going to be a no-go.
What do you think, sir?
Practically a highway.
Yes, it is practically a highway.
Where are the bears?
They're getting their sodomy lubricants ready.
After a unanimous vote, we decide to turn around and backtrack. Even this doesn't really dampen our mood. I mean, a trail feels very different going the opposite direction, so it all seemed new once again. We were also able to make a little better speed through here now that we'd already been through here once, and we knew that there was no big nasty surprises waiting for us. So we got back to the clearing where Jason had turned right and took the opposite fork in the road. Now I think Jason initially had wisely chosen, because that fork to the right, we see Henrik coming out of here, certainly did look more appealing than this one, where the grass was even taller. But nonetheless, Jason was leading and we decided to follow. Now we don't see any of these trails on the GPS, but it does give us kind of a general view of where water is and also the direction of any real roads nearby. So when we get to the next little decision point, we decide to go right. And once again, grass, lots of grass.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Ah.
We come up to another junction and stop to look at the GPS once again and see if we can get a hint.
Well, there's a road that way about 1.5 kilometers. There's a road that way about a click and a half. If we go, and that way's about 2 clicks. Maybe a little more, so I don't know. Try both, I guess, see where they go. I mean, this looks like the main road. This, I don't know. We follow!
Well, the trail to the right looked a lot more appealing than the one straight ahead, so off to the right we went. Grass and more grass. This trail had better grass than my front lawn. Now the trail started turning a little more into a kind of black earth forest trail, and it was also a little moister in here. Still some pretty decent little rocky climbs. Now, we'd been going down this branch of the trail for quite a while when I realized I hadn't seen or heard Henrik for a while, so I decided to stop and wait for him to catch up. And when I couldn't see him in my mirrors, after a few minutes I decided to switch off the ignition and see if I could at least hear him. And that's when I heard the sounds of a DR spinning its wheel. So I got off the 800 and walked back to give him a hand. It doesn't look it here, but it's actually relatively steep, so in order to get a run at this, Henrik would have to back the bike quite a ways down this hill. So we decide that with a little push and a little help, he can be on his way, and he eventually gets rolling and heads off down the trail. Even though we still had some grass growing in the middle of the trail here, this trail was actually turning out to be quite enjoyable. And I guess enough time had passed that Jason started to think we were missing, so he started walking back.
Easy coming.
Now that is a snazzy suit now that Jason wears on these rides.
Whoa. Whoa.
Grass again. Lots of frackin' grass. Sorry about the frackin', but I just watched all 4 seasons of Battlestar Galactica on DVD. And then I got back to where Jason had left his bike, and I'd been riding for a while, so I knew it was going to take some time for Jason to walk back. So I decided to take a break. Then I saw something strange come out of the woods. It was a DR650 with 2 fully grown men on it. Every time Henrik hit a bump, I could hear the poor bike bottoming out.
So we finally found out what your problem was. Not enough weight. I like that skid plate noise.
The trail, despite the warning signs, just seemed to keep going and going. It was really nice, actually, here in the forest. You know, we're talking August in Montreal, which tends to be quite hot and humid. And at this time of the morning, it was still nice and shady and relatively cool. And it had been dry for a few weeks, so we really hadn't seen much mud on this ride. We started climbing more and more, and the higher we got, the more moisture there seemed to be, so I think maybe at the higher elevations there had been some more recent rain.
Interesting choice.
And then I came up to Jason, and he had actually stopped at our first genuine mud hole of the day. Now Jason looked back and asked me if I thought it looked passable, and of course I answered.
Oh, yeah. Only one way to find out.
Of course I wasn't the one going first, but Jason is also getting smarter in his old age, and he decided he was going to go take a look. Well, after daintily testing the temperature of the water, Jason seemed convinced that it all looked good, so he walked back to the 800 and off he went. Now, of course, hindsight being hindsight, we realized that if we hadn't stopped here and checked the depth, we could have probably carried a little bit of speed through this mud hole and actually made it out with a lot less trouble. But Jason headed off at a walking pace here, and after a moment's contemplation, splashed into the mud.
Not that I
He
saw.
didn't get far before the old TKC-80 started spinning. So Henrik decided to head up on ahead and give him a hand. But with a little bit of throttle and I think something called muscles, because I think Jason's actually somewhat in shape, he managed to get it out by himself. And since he was already up there, Henrik decided to do his own little reconnaissance to see if there was a bypass on the right-hand side so he could avoid soiling I decided better the devil you know, and I was just going to follow in Jason's tire tracks here. Didn't get too far before I was hung up, but with a little pushing and a little horsepower, the old 800 chewed its way out.
Hey, somebody made a trench.
Henrik on the lighter Suzuki sailed right through without any help at all. Now the trail continued to change. Not so much grass anymore, but the forest equivalent, the fern. And ferns are relatively delicate, so when you start to see a lot of ferns on the trail, you definitely know that trail is not seeing a lot of traffic. Now sometimes you can get pretty caught up in your ride, and I was just focusing on getting through the trail, and I realized I hadn't seen or heard from Henrik in a while. So I decided to stop and take a look and wait. And within a few seconds, he appeared in my mirrors, so off I went. We also started to see here a lot more logs and branches protruding onto the trail and uncleared debris. So every time I rounded a corner and saw the trail continue, I was a little bit surprised. Then I came to a section that had grass and ferns, and I thought to myself, this can't be good. Spidey sense is tingling now. Grass and ferns. I'm getting that feeling in my gut that at some point very soon we're going to be turning around and going back the way we came. But then once again the trail seemed to open up a bit and I could see distinct tire tracks. There was even some evidence that someone had been in there with a chainsaw and cut away some of the deadfall. So I started to let a little optimism creep back in. Meanwhile, up in front, Jason had come up to our first real obstacle. Now as I dismount, you can see a few water drops on my gas tank. Now some of those are from splashing through that one mud hole, but most of them are actually now from water dripping out the bottom of my helmet. It is starting to get warm, and yes, that is kind of disgusting. Now we knew we were going to have to try and lift these logs, so of course Henrik volunteered to hold the camera.
What do we have here?
Toll booth.
And again, our intrepid little group found itself.
Turn it off because I had it on.
It is recording, Riley.
Is the red dot blinking?
No, but there is an REC in red, which I presume,
Blasting the branch out of the way.
which means recording.
Work, surprisingly.
Recording again.
Left. All right, let's do it. Yeah, I'm ready.
Heave-ho!
Good luck with that one. Now it's going all the way back.
Oh yes. So I think this one is bypass on the right. We got a nice spot right here.
Oh yeah.
You can just hop over it, dude.
On an angle, yeah. I don't like these teeth. I always wanted new teeth.
All right. What are your impressions, Jason?
How far back are we going to have to go when we turn around?
Hey, that's part of the fun. No turning back.
This is a fun ride.
Okay, turn it off. Let's get the fuck out of here.
Well, we got the obstacle moved, and then looking down here at my GPS, it seemed that we were actually heading in the right direction to get out of this place. Now, I hate these angled logs crossing the trail. If there's enough room, you can try to swing around and kind of cross them at 90 degrees. And if not, especially on a big heavy bike, with someone riding it who doesn't know how to do a wheelie, your front tire can either skid along the log, or more likely, your front tire makes it over the log, and then the rear end hits the log and skids out. So I approached it quite slowly, and of course, ended up getting stuck. Got my fat ass off the seat, and with a little help from Jason, all is well.
Thank you.
I hadn't gone very far till I came to another fallen tree. Now this one wasn't really blocking the trail, but I decided to head up and snap off some of the branches that were kind of at eye level. It was starting to look more and more like we were one of the few people who'd made it this far this season on this trail. Meanwhile, back at the diagonal log, Henrik was hung up, so I decided to head back and give him a little push.
Go.
At the next junction, there was a trail off to the left, but it was marked no snowmobiles and no ATVs. So even though we were neither, we thought that we had probably better go right. Now, just as I was thinking that things were going really well, I crossed this little diagonal branch and almost dumped it, and up ahead of me, Henrik threw the DR down. As I was walking over to give Henrik a hand, I could see what had caused the crash: the dreaded moss-covered rock.
Ooh, moss. Nice. Let me come on your side.
Now, yes, we can all lift our bikes up by ourselves, but when you've been riding for a few hours and you're starting to get tired and you're not quite sure how long you're still going to be out here, why not use a little help if it's available? I thought I would do a little tidying up before I decided to try this little obstacle here. I looked down at the GPS, and it certainly seemed that an exit to civilization was near at hand. But once I got rolling again, the fact that there was so many branches overhanging the trail and things smacking into your helmet meant I was going to be really impressed if we didn't have to turn around and head back the way we came. Now this was starting to feel a little more like a mini adventure than just one of our regular Sunday afternoon rides, and that's why it just seemed perfect when up ahead Jason bent over, and right beside his bike he found a discarded moose antler. Well, we hadn't gone much more than another 100 yards or so when we came to a real obstacle. Up ahead was a tree, and this was not a tree that we were going to be able to pull out of the way. On approach, it looked like there might be a possible bypass on the right through the forest. But yeah, there was no way we were getting that thing out of the way. And once again, the trail on the other side didn't look that well used, so I was starting to feel that maybe this was all for nothing. But it looked like someone on an ATV perhaps had bashed their way through here on the bypass some point in the past. So we had to take that as a good sign that at least someone had been down this trail in our lifetime. For a brief moment, we thought maybe the DR could squeeze through on the right.
Actually, what if we go through here?
But after a little reflection, we realized that that was going to be way more work than just driving around through the woods.
All right, let her rip.
So Henrik set off,
Aye.
with Jason going along as his spotter, or more like his pusher. Now, ideally, you'd want to have a bit of speed going through here, because otherwise what happens is just what happened here. You stop, and your rear tire comes to rest up against a moist, slippery log, and then you're not going anywhere without a lot of grunting and pushing and probably some help from one of your buddies. Now, at this point, I'm in this strange predicament where this little tree on my right is actually right in the way where I can't put my hand on the throttle without wrapping my arm around the tree. So at this point, I had to sit there and wait for Jason to come over and bend the little guy out of the way.
I can't get my hand there. Thank you. Yes. Ah, you whore. Yep. Back. Whoa. Okay. Jesus.
And finally, after a lot of muscling the 800 around and a lot of wheel spin and a few stalls, I managed to get the old 800 back out onto the trail. I wasn't back on the trail more than a few feet when Henrik pointed out a whole bunch of slippery roots were in the path, and I was still huffing and puffing pretty good from the little bypass, so I got hung up on the roots, and luckily Henrik was right there to give me a push. Now, does this trail look very promising? Because at this point it wasn't looking very promising to me. Here you can see Jason coming through that same section. And he makes it through in fine style.
What a primo place we found here.
I would say
That's good.
we're getting our workout today, boys and girls.
Well, we continued to head farther down this trail, and there was more and more logs crossing the trail, but at least I seemed to be getting my technique down and keeping my speed up and bumping over them. Up ahead, Henrik had gotten caught up in a spot here where there was some moss-covered rocks and some rotten logs on the trail. So I gave him a hand and he made it through that section.
Give her.
And I decided to do a little prep work here and move some of this stuff out of the way to make my passage go a little easier. I didn't get more than 2 feet before I hit a rock hidden in the grass. And down I went.
That was a good one.
Jason was right there to give me a hand. We got the old 800 up.
Good. Didn't hit. Well, now I got lots of momentum.
Ideally, I would have liked to have hit this section with a little more momentum, but the 800 with the Midas E09 in the back managed to chew its way up. I wasn't the only one working hard. I could hear the fan on the old 800 was spinning up a little more regularly now. And once again, we hadn't gotten very far, and we came across another tree blocking the trail.
Okay. Here we can see us. There's the road. That's about 800 meters. Sadly, we have a few slight obstacles in our path. So it looks like it's bushwhacking again.
Yes.
Well, we had kind of plotted out a preliminary route here on the right as a bypass. And this bypass would actually be quite a bit longer because there was a lot of more obstacles actually in the forest itself. So I headed in. Henrik had actually already been through here, so we'd already learned a few lessons about where to go.
Henrik, move that branch there, Bill. Okay. Whoa.
Without too much trouble, I ended up on the other side of the fallen log, and now it was Jason's turn to bushwhack through the forest. Now I'll say it again that we were so lucky it had been dry for a long time, because if you get a couple of days of rain and you try to just bull your way through the forest like this, you're not going to get very far on a 500-pound bike driving on pine needles and wet leaves in the bush here.
I think there's another tree over there.
No. I think there's another tree. Hello, hello, hello.
Up ahead, Henrik had tried to bypass a fallen tree and gotten stuck in some mud on the side. And while Jason was walking up to help him, I decided just to force through up the middle. And that seemed to work okay. And then we got through this other section here with all these fallen branches left and right, where it sure didn't seem like anyone had been through here all that recently. There was obviously a trail here, so I was still somewhat optimistic we weren't going to have to backtrack all the way back to where we started. Henrik and Jason were still struggling to get the DR out of that little swampy spot, and I decided to lay in wait here and get some action shots of them heading my way. the boys managed to extricate the mighty DR. Here we see Henrik navigating those two fallen logs. And Jason slides through on the 800. As I walked back to my bike, I could see that everyone was a little less chatty.
Good.
And I think everyone was going to be pretty happy when we finally got out of here and got on a paved road. Well, I was in the lead now, and I was riding along, and all of a sudden up ahead I saw it, and I pretty much knew right away when I got to the edge of this clearing that this looked like the end of this trail. And I rolled forward a little farther, and you can't really see it, but right in front of me there on the left is a pretty sizable ditch. So it was time to kick out the side stand and come up with some sort of a plan on what we were going to do here. Now, this wasn't much of a trail, but it was kind of tantalizing to know that probably only half a kilometer or maybe a little bit more up ahead was a road. But the farther I walked down here, the more I could see that this was leading us down into some swampy area. It's hard to see on this footage because my camera's angled pretty low, but up ahead there actually is some water down there. Initially I was hopeful that maybe there might have been a trail running along the rim of that wet area at the bottom. But then once I got a little closer, I could see that this was definitely going to be a no-go.
Whoa! Yeah, but where's the road?
Now, I really didn't want to go back the way we'd come, so I ended up going on a recce of the ditch that ran downhill to the left here, and after about a half an hour, I walked back to report that if we could make it down that way, there was what looked like a decent trail.
Left.
So we set off.
Yep.
Now, I know this doesn't look like much of a trail, and I think someone had actually driven some sort of a logging skidder through here, and that these ditches we kept running into were actually really deep wheel ruts. Now, sadly, the GoPro batteries had just run out when Henrik just disappeared. He was riding in the right-hand rut, and I was riding in the left in this really tall grass, and all of a sudden Henrik just hit this huge hole, and he just disappeared, bike and all. Luckily, nobody was hurt, and we took that moment to put some new batteries in the camera and carry on. Now, somehow, I ended up in front, and I was keeping my eyes peeled for any more of those holes. And there was no holes, but there was plenty of other hidden obstacles. Now, this certainly didn't look like a very well-used trail down the mountain here. But after squeezing under this branch, it looked like we had found the beginnings of a real trail. Now, this was starting to look even more promising. A quick look at the GPS, and we were only a few hundred meters from a known track. And by now, I was pretty much convinced that we were onto something. So I stopped to wait and see what was taking the other guys so long. Have another look at the GPS. just as I was getting ready to head back and see what was taking them so long, Henrik popped out of the woods. So off I went. Now the GPS was telling me I was tantalizingly close to being back on a trail we knew, and sure enough, popped into this little clearing and there was the road home.
This is how we came in.
This road, which this morning had seemed so new and unknown, now felt like an old friend. You know, we could get out of first gear, get a little bit of speed up. It was great just to feel a little breeze on your face, a little wind blowing away the sweat. So I kind of got into the moment here and was having a great old time, and forgot about the fact that there was a couple of relatively steep hills that we'd climbed up this morning. And of course, if you go up a hill, when you go back, you go down the hill. So I got to that first big steep hill, and I was definitely carrying a little more speed, probably, than I should have.
Slow down. Slow down.
Now I decided that instead of trying to really get on the brakes here or something, that there was a lot of runoff area at the bottom of this hill, and I would just ride it out. Now I knew I still had to get down the hill where I'd had my first fall of the day, so I moderated my speed a little and decided that discretion was the better part of valor. And as soon as I could see that that was the hill here, got up on the foot pegs, and I remembered that there was this inside line where I could avoid a lot of the rocks by staying on the shoulder. And that worked out well. And once again, instead of trying to really keep on the brakes, whatever, I knew there was a runoff area at the bottom of this hill, so I didn't mind if I gained a little bit of speed on the descent. Feeling a little refreshed, Jason and I had a little discussion about what to do next.
Yo, what's...
So we set off with Jason in the lead. As we crossed this little puddle, I was once again amazed at how little water and mud we'd run into today. Certainly would have changed the nature of the ride, and we would probably still be up there somewhere on that trail trying to find our way out. Well, Jason was in the lead when we finally got back on asphalt, and he said he knew of another little trail we could do nearby. It was less than 10 minutes later when he turned off on a gravel road. The gravel road pretty quickly turned sandy. And here we can see we're actually going up a hill, and on our right is a big sand pit. Now this track continued, and we kept passing the entrances to more and more sand pits. Sadly, each one was marked as being off limits. Eventually we came to the base of a really long, steep uphill, and Jason pulled up ahead there in front of me, and in front of him there was an ATV waiting for another ATV to try to climb it, so we knew this one was going to be a bit challenging. The second ATV finally managed to claw his way up. When the coast was clear, Jason headed off. If I'd been feeling a little more aggressive and a little less tired, I might have tried second gear. But at this point I decided to keep it in first and just try to keep my speed up a little bit. And without too much trouble, made it to the top. Here with the handheld camera, you get a better idea of how long this hill is. And there we see Henrik on the mighty DR.
Nice!
Nicely done. After that, it was pretty standard ATV trail. But even here, we were surprised to see a tree blocking our way. Although this tree looked like it had just recently fallen down. We could see the two ATVs were making their own bypass to the left. I was tired of bushwhacking through the woods, and I thought maybe if I folded my mirrors down and got the 800 down in that ditch to the right, that we may be able to lay it on its side and kind of drag it through there.
Alright, we'll pull her back a bit, I guess. Yeah.
Well, by the time we got the 800 leaned over enough to get under the log, the foot pegs were dragging on the ground. So with someone lifting up the log as much as they could, and Jason and I dragging the 800, it just managed to squeeze under. Of course, at this point we realized it was probably less work to just drive around the obstacle in the woods.
Okay. Push!
I did a quick scouting run, and it seemed like the ATV guys had found a pretty good way around. Jason didn't have too much trouble making his way through.
Easy! You want to go through here? Okay.
Up ahead at the roadblock, I could see somebody standing there. So I decided this might be a good time to give my rake whistle a quick test. But it turned out to just be Jason, so it was a false alarm.
I think he's not finished. He'll be coming back.
I think he had a pocket knife. You know what, like those two guys with the ATVs, if they both tied onto this thing, they could have pulled it. This would have snapped it.
No, this is maple. It would not have snapped it.
Eh.
You might have been able to...
No, you need 80 feet of rope, you leave it slack. You got her, Chico!
Henrik made it around without too much trouble as well.
I think we have less trouble than the ATV guys.
Yep. Okay, let's go!
Despite having had a pretty full day, we decided to stop at a sandpit we knew about. We didn't stop for very long. Henrik only had time for one crash. Ordinarily, we might have played around in this sandpit for quite a while, but we all decided it was probably best to get moving and head home. Plus, the road out of the sandpit that leads to the main road is actually a very nice ride. We weren't in a huge rush, so we stuck to the back roads and took a rather leisurely route home. At one point, off in the distance, I saw these bizarre looking headlights, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was, and then as they got closer I realized it was two ATVs driving side by side down the road having a conversation. Now, even though we were officially on a road run home, we couldn't resist just popping off the asphalt again when we saw this little trail entrance. It wasn't the most exciting trail, it basically just paralleled the road here, but we never miss a chance to check out a new trail because you never know how they're going to pan out. This one was pretty rutted, and obviously people had been riding on it when it was quite muddy. So we decided to pop back on the road and get home. Eventually we made it back to a nice paved road that parallels the river. And the river here separates Quebec from Ontario. Now ordinarily we would have headed west, back to the bridge that crosses the river at Hawkesbury. But today'd been a big day, so we decided we were going to head east here and take the ferry across at Carillon. After waiting only a few minutes, we boarded this little ferry. The ride across here is not very long. In the distance there you can see the hydroelectric dam. Now if you like this video, we did go back to that same area of the abandoned ski hill the following spring, and that video's already been posted, and it's called Ice, Mud, Bent Wheels and Cut Faces. And once again we had a pretty good little mini adventure there. I encourage you to hit the like button. We really enjoy the feedback from people who are watching this. If you'd like to keep track of what we're up to, you can always go to our Facebook page and hit the like there as well. And lastly, I'd like to send a shout out to one of our associate members. We have an associate member, TG, in Turkey. Hang in there, buddy. And with that, I'll sign off. So even though we didn't get back by noon, as we had promised our spouses, we did eventually get home. And so ends another Awesome Players Off-Road Motorcycle Club adventure.